Hey, what's going on everyone? This is Jerry from Epic Boss Fight. And in today's video, I'm going to lay out a guide for defeating one of the most challenging bosses in Elden Ring. That of course being the formidable and infamous Fire Giant. This big boy is a force to be reckoned with, and it's gonna require just a bit of skill and strategy to take him down. This dude's gonna possess a serious amount of HP, and he's also gonna dish out a handful of powerful fire attacks. However, if you do manage to beat him, you're gonna be rewarded with a generous bounty of 180,000 runes and the coveted Remembrance of the Fire Giant consumable. This can actually be sold for 30,000 runes or traded to Enya at the Round Table Hold, and it'll actually unlock some powerful abilities like the Giant's Red Braid or the Burn of Flaming Cantation. But in this EBF strategy video, we'll dissect the mechanics of this epic battle, discuss his attacks and patterns, and of course, where to position yourself to strike as effectively as possible. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get on into it. So before even stepping foot into the arena, we're going to want to take some necessary preparations for the impending fight. I'm going to highly recommend that you reach a minimum level of 110 before deciding to take this guy on. And yeah, I know it's possible to defeat him at a lower level, but if you're going to do that, it's going to be really challenging to do so unless you're kind of a pro Elden Ring player. If your character is currently significantly short of level 110, you might want to consider tracking down some easier bosses or just kind of grind it out until you get there. Now, if you're going to want to survive the Fire Giant's onslaught of attacks, it's going to be important that you have the appropriate armor set, which should mitigate the heavy fire and strike damage that he's going to dish out. The Black Flame Monk set, the Malformed Dragon set, and the Bull Goat armor set are all going to be excellent choices, and they're all going to boost your fire and strike resistances. In terms of the Fire Giant's defenses, he has complete resistance against fire and holy damage, as well as many status effects. However, the good news is that he's vulnerable to bleed damage, so putting together an effective bleed setup with weapons to suit will help deal as much damage as possible. He's also vulnerable to poison, to Scarlet Rot, and to Frostbite, with Frostbite being the one that he's going to be most resistant to of all of them. Using Ash Spirits can also be an effective strategy to evade some of the Giant's attacks and divert his attention, but if you do so, just make sure to use an Ash Spirit with a high amount of health, a high amount of damage output, and some pretty good combat skills. Among the various options, Lutel the Headless is going to be a commendable choice because he excels in both tanking damage and combat proficiency. You're also going to have the option to use Alexander as an NPC summon, but for those of you wondering why you're not able to find his summon location, it's because it's only made available after you progress through his questline. And actually, Alexander is a very effective sidekick to have in this fight. Just bear in mind that it will end up raising the Fire Giant's total HP if you do so. Okay, so now with battle preparations out of the way, let's get into the fight itself, starting with Phase 1. So the Fire Giant's size is going to give him a pretty significant advantage for obvious reasons. It's going to enable him to attack you from a much longer distance than you would actually expect. And to make matters worse, his attacks from afar can actually be really challenging to dodge. So the strategy to remember here is to narrow the gap between yourself and the Fire Giant, as it's going to make it a lot harder for him to actually land those attacks. The very first attack he'll likely open with as you approach him will be Avalanche. You're going to be able to recognize it when he sticks his shield into the ground. So to prevent taking damage from this, you're going to want to actually roll into the Fire Giant's Avalanche attack, or if you're riding Torrent, you're going to want to dismount him as soon as that animation begins. That brief moment of invincibility during the roll or dismount is going to be critical for getting past his attack. And remember, in addition to closing that distance between you and the Fire Giant, ultimately you're going to want to position yourself between the Giant's feet. And it's going to seem a little risky at first, but it effectively prevents him from using his most deadly attacks. To be more specific, on your way to positioning yourself between his legs, you're going to want to do your best to keep your Tarnished behind his heel as best as possible. And what that's going to do is actually going to help prevent taking damage when he inevitably decides to roll away from you. Now, while you have your character near his feet, what you're going to want to do is aim for his left foot only. And after a couple of strikes, you should be able to break his manacle and stun him for a brief moment. And it's going to expose a weak spot that you just want to slam, slam, slam as much as possible. Again, if you have a weapon with bleed, in my case I had a Uchi Katana, and it just takes 3-4 whacks with that thing for him to break that manacle and expose that weak point that you just want to exploit as much as possible. So once those manacles have been broken off, the Fire Giant is going to start unleashing a new set of attacks. Now one of these involves an exploding orb of fire, which can be avoided by luring it away from the giant, getting close to it as much as possible, and it's going to trigger an explosion basically, and then once that triggers, just dodge away at the last second. You could also use Torrent to kind of sprint through the orb on your way to the giant's ankles. Just make sure that you pass close enough to actually activate that explosion. The next attack is going to be a ball of fire launched from the boss's hands. Unlike the previous attack though, this one's going to be extremely fast and difficult to evade. I found it helpful to actually begin sprinting my character to the side as soon as I saw the giant raise its hand. And then once you start to see that flame about to come out, just dodge roll away from it. Again, if you're on Torrent, evading this attack can actually be much easier. Just make sure to sprint again to the side or laterally from the attack rather than into it. And then once you actually whittle his HP down to about 50%, he'll go ahead and start phase 2 of the fight. After phase 1 ends, there's going to be a short cutscene where he very generously breaks off his own leg, lights it on fire, and offer it as some sort of sacrifice, which obviously is going to open up a third eye in the middle of his chest. In this phase of the fight, the fire giant will actually be a lot less agile, but will deal significantly more fire damage. Right after the cutscene ends, there's going to be a brief period that you can use to either buff your character or get in some ranged attacks. I think what I did was I shot some glintstones at his weak point, which is going to be that eyeball in the middle of his chest. Or you could also summon Torrent to begin positioning yourself closer to him near his heel. Now, just like the previous phase, it's going to be important to stay close and avoid getting too far away, as his attacks will be much less devastating in close proximity. In the previous phase, the primary focus was on hitting the fire giant's ankle. However, with fewer limbs to fixate on, it's time to shift the focus to other parts of the body. The primary attack point during this stage of the fight is going to be the right foot of the fire giant's only remaining leg. His weak points are technically on his wrist and his chest, but those are going to be significantly more difficult to hit and will leave you a lot more, vulnerable to taking some massive hit damage. Now remember, as long as you have a weapon that can inflict bleed, poison, or scarlet rot, keeping it slow and steady on his heel will inevitably wear his HP down. Just trust me on this one. Now the tell from one of his stronger attacks is going to be when the fire giant leans forward. He's going to then place his hands on the ground and it's going to ignite the surrounding area. Now this resulting blast can actually cause a pretty significant amount of damage, so it's crucial to steer clear of that. Just get out of there, get away, just run away, because getting caught in this attack can leave you really vulnerable to any other follow-up attacks he's going to give. So it's important to just get out of there. So you'll notice me here in the second phase of the fight that all I'm basically doing is doing my best to avoid his attacks and just getting behind his heel as much as possible. If I see something, if he jumps around, if there's a tell, we'll do what I can to get out of the way, and then right after I will just sprint Torrent to the back of his heel. Now some people like to not use Torrent, just do it on foot. I found it a little bit easier to be on Torrent. I guess it kind of depends on your confidence in controlling him a little bit. If you're good at being precise with Torrent and his maneuverability, I would highly recommend it. It just helps get away and dodge from his attacks as quickly as possible. As soon as he starts moving, to avoid his shield slams, just try your best to sprint your horse towards the back of his ankle. As long as you keep doing that, he should be able to miss you every time he strikes down with his shield. So defeating the fire giant in Elden Ring is just going to require a combination of strategy, of skill, and some patience ultimately. But by using those right armor sets that we talked about, the right weapons, ash spirits, then you're going to be able to mitigate the fire giant's attacks and deal some reasonable damage. During the first phase, just remember it's important to focus on breaking the fire giant's manacles and attacking his ankles to stun him. In the second phase, just try to target the remaining foot while avoiding the fire giant's new attacks, and remember, just stay close to the fire giant and be mindful of his moves. And if you do that, victory will be within your reach. Promise. For those that made it to the end of this video, thank you guys for watching, thank you for subscribing, and I'll catch you on the next one here on Epic Boss Fight.